new coach coached that football team, Alabama, that won, and he's got a meeting with him this afternoon, so he had to squeeze you guys in. So you guys should be really special.
How are you guys doing? So I understand y'all got a day off yesterday. I'm sure y'all enjoyed that. And y'all got to sleep in today, so a little bit of 2-hour delay. I'm sure you're not sad about that at all. Well, today I'm going to be doing a little bit of reading for y'all. As y'all know, reading is really important. And it's not just important for school. There's a lot of things that you can do with reading other than school. For me included, football. If I didn't know how to read, I wouldn't be playing football at UT. You see, football is not just a game where you hit other people. It's not just running into somebody full speed. You got to do a lot of studying. I spend about 40 hours a week studying football. And I do a lot of reading. I do a lot of film study. And so all the stuff that I do off the field helps on the field. Because I've got to be able to study my opponent, read about my opponent. And I've got to be able to know everything about him, from how tall he is, how fast he runs, to who his girlfriend is. So it's really important for me to be able to read. And in school, I'm an engineer. Does anybody in here know what engineers do? Anybody? What about you? What do they do, sweetheart? That's correct. They build stuff. We build houses, we build roads, we build bridges, buildings like this right here. So for that, you have to be able to read. You have to be able to read blueprints. You have to be able to read books. So that way buildings or bridges don't fall down. And so even if you don't like reading and you're more of a math student, I'm more of a math student. Can I see my math students, my science students? All right. You're like me. If you're not, that's okay. You're going to be great English teachers. You're going to be great English people. But for all those math and science people, to be able to read is really, really, really important. Because one, you got to read all your textbooks. But two, you got to be able to read in the real world. You got to be able to read all sorts of stuff, right? Technical reports and all that fun stuff. And if you can't do that, you can't do the science behind that. So without further ado, I'm going to show you all the book that we're going to be reading today. It's called Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. When I was your age, I read this same book probably 4 times. It's a good book. It's a really fun book. And y'all are going to get to read, but I'm going to read a couple of chapters for y'all today. See how this works. All right, so here's our book. All right, we're going to start with chapter 1. I don't know if y'all can see this picture, but these are 2 very old people. They're the father and mother of Mr. Bucket. Their names are Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine. You also have 2 other very old people, and these are the father and mother of Miss Bucket. Their names are Grandpa George and Grandma Georgina. And then you have Mr. Bucket and Miss Bucket. And these are the parents of a small boy whose name is Charlie Bucket. Now Charlie would like to say a couple words to y'all. How do y'all do? Y'all do good? Good? He's pleased to meet you. The whole family, the Bucket family, there are 6 grown-ups and little Charlie Bucket. They all live together in a small wooden house on the edge of a great town. The house wasn't nearly large enough for so many people, and life was extremely uncomfortable. There were only 2 rooms in this small place, and there was only 1 bed. The bed was given to the 4 old grandparents because they were so old and tired. They were so old and tired that they never got out of the bed. Wouldn't that be nice to be able to stay in bed all day long? think I'd get tired of being in bed. Grandpa Joe and Grandpa Josephine on this side of the bed, and Grandpa George and Grandma Georgina on the other side of the bed. Think about that, 4 people in one bed. That's a cramped bed. Mr. and Mrs. Bucket and little Charlie Bucket slept in the other room on mattresses on the floor. In the summertime, this wasn't too bad. But in the wintertime, freezing cold drafts blew across the floor all night long, and it was awful. There wasn't any question of them being able to buy another bed or buy another house to sleep in. They were far too poor for that. Mr. Bucket was the only person in the family that had a job, and he worked at a toothpaste factory, where he sat all day long on a bench and screwed little tiny caps on the tops of toothpaste tubes after the tubes had been filled. But the toothpaste cap screwer is never paid very much money. And little poor Mr. Bucket, however, hard he worked and fast he worked, he could never screw on the caps fast enough to be able to make enough money to buy half the things they needed for such a large family. There wasn't even enough money to buy proper food for them all. The only meals that they could afford were bread and margarine for breakfast, boiled potatoes and cabbage for lunch, and cabbage soup for dinner. Sundays were a bit better. They all looked forward to Sundays because then, although they had the exact same thing, they could have 2 portions. Mr. Bucket, of course, didn't starve, neither did the rest of the family. But every one of them, the 2 grandparents, or the 2 grandfathers and the 2 grandmothers, Charlie's father, Charlie's mother, and especially Charlie himself, went about all morning till night with a horrible empty feeling in their tummies. Charlie felt worst of all, and although his father and his mother often went without their share of lunch or dinner so that they could give him their food, it still wasn't nearly enough for the growing boy, and he desperately wanted something more filling and satisfying than cabbage and cabbage soup. The one thing he longed for more than anything else was chocolate. Walking into school in the mornings, Charlie could see great slabs of chocolate piled up high on the shop windows. And he stopped and stared and pressed his nose against the glass, and his mouth watering like mad. Many times a day, he would see other children taking creamy candy bars out of their pockets and munching on them greedily. And that, of course, was pure torture. Once a year on his birthday, Charlie Bucket, that was the only time he got to taste a little bite of chocolate. The whole family saved up their money for the special occasion. And when the great day arrived, Charlie was always presented with a small chocolate bar to eat all by himself. And each time he received it on those marvelous birthday mornings, he would place it carefully in a small wooden box that he owned and treasure it as though the bar was solid gold. And for the next few days, he would allow himself only to look at it, but never touch it. Then at last, when he could stand it no longer, he would peel back a tiny bit of paper so that one corner was exposed, and he would eat a tiny nibble, just enough to allow the lovely sweet taste to spread slowly over his tongue. The next day, he would take another tiny nibble, and so on and so forth. And in this way, Charlie would make a 10-cent candy bar last for over a month. Over a month. Imagine eating one candy bar for a whole month. That's some slow eating right there. But hey, I haven't even told you about the one awful thing that tortured Charlie a little more. The lover of chocolate, more than anything else, this thing for him was far worse than seeing slabs of chocolate in shop windows or watching other children munch on creamy candy bars right in front of them. It was the most terrifying, terrible, torturing thing that you could possibly imagine. It was this. In the town itself, actually slightly within view of the house that Charlie lived, there was an enormous chocolate factory. Just imagine that. It wasn't a simply ordinary, enormous chocolate factory. It was the largest, most giant, and most famous in the whole world. It was the Wonka factory. Owned by a man named Mr. Willy Wonka. The greatest inventor and maker of chocolates that there has ever been. And what a tremendous, marvelous place it was. It was it had huge iron gates that led into it, and a high wall surrounding it, and smoke bleaching from its chimneys. Strange whizzing sounds coming from deep inside of it. And outside the walls, for over half a mile in every direction, the air was scented with a heavy, rich smell of melting chocolate. Twice a day, on his way from and to school, little Charlie Bucket had to walk right past the gates of the factory. And every time, he would begin to walk very slowly, taking long, deep sniffs of the gorgeous chocolatey smell all around him. Oh, how he loved that smell. And oh, how he wished he could go inside the factory and see what it was like. That's the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2. Mr. Willy Wonka's factory. In the evenings, he finished his supper of watered cabbage soup. Charlie always went into the room of his 4 grandparents and listened to their stories, and then afterwards he would say goodnight. Every one of these old people was nearly over 90. That's old. They were all shriveled prunes, as bony as skeletons, and throughout the day until Charlie made his appearance, they lay huddled in one bed, 2 on either end, with nightcaps on their heads, dozing the time away with nothing to do. But as soon as they heard the door opening and heard Charlie's voice say, "Good evening, Grandpa Joe and Grandma Josephine, and Grandpa George and Grandma Georgina," then all 4 of them would suddenly sit up. Their old wrinkled faces would light up with smiles of pleasure, and talking would begin. For they loved this little boy, and he was the only bright thing in their lives, and his evening visits were something they looked forward to all day long. Often Charlie's mother and father would come in and listen as well. They would stand by the door listening to the stories the old people told, and thus for perhaps half an hour every night. The whole family would forget that they were hungry and full. One evening, when Charlie was in his grandparents' room, he asked them, "Is it really true that Wonka's chocolate factory is the biggest in the world?" "True!" cried all 4 of them at once. "Of course it's true. Good heavens, didn't you know that? It's about 50 times bigger than any of the other factories." "And is Mr. Willy Wonka really the cleverest chocolate maker in the world?" "My dear boy," said Grandpa Joe, raising himself up a little higher on his pillow, "Mr. Willy Wonka is the most amazing, the most fantastic, the most extraordinary chocolate maker in the world." "I thought everybody knew that." "I knew he was famous, Grandpa Joe. I knew he was very clever." "Clever!" cried the old man. "He's more than that. He's a magician. He can make anything he wants." "Isn't that a fact, my dears?" The other 3 grandparents nodded their heads slowly up and down and said, "Absolutely true, just as true as it can be." Grandpa Joe said, "You mean to say I never told you about Mr. Willy Wonka and his chocolate factory?" "Never," answered Charlie. "Good heavens above, I don't know what's the matter with me. Will you tell me now, Grandpa Joe, please?" "I certainly will. Sit down by my bedside, dear, and listen carefully." Now you see, Grandpa Joe was the oldest of the 4 grandparents. He was 96 and a half. And that's just about as old as anybody can be.